Thank you for viewing this recorded webinar titled Developing a Policy and Procedure Manual. During this presentation, I will outline the importance of policies and procedures in day-to-day operations, discuss establishing a team to draft the core policies and procedures, and give examples of potential policies and procedures in various areas of operation. Before I discuss the specifics regarding policies and procedures, I want to outline why they are important. Why do you need policies and procedures if there are bylaws? To answer this question, we will look at the progression of what governs a nonprofit or non-governmental organization, as each one uses several documents to govern their organization. First, each nonprofit entity is held to the legal requirements of the country, province, or state where they are located. Second, every nonprofit entity is held to its bylaws and guidelines or chartering document. Third, policies, and lastly, procedures. Each of these items are important, and the nonprofit entity should follow them all. I also want to note that one cannot contradict the other. Now is a good time to highlight how bylaws differ from policies and procedures. Bylaws are general in nature, and the policies and procedures are then utilized to outline specific details. Bylaws changes must be approved by the membership, while changes to the policies and procedures require the approval of the board of directors only. Bylaws are meant to be the overall governing document of the organization, and the policies and procedures describe the day-to-day management. Developing clear policies and procedures will lessen the paperwork and increase the board's impact on the membership experience. If the Developing Honor Society has standardized policies and procedures, leaders can utilize the instructions already established, and the board can focus its time on creating the ultimate membership experience for themselves and the membership at large. The board should create policies and procedures as the need arises. For example, as you are planning your first program, you may have a discussion about how you will rent a venue, who will be responsible for signing the contract, and whether or not the entire board needs to approve the contract. Once the board has made those decisions, create a policy or procedure in reference to renting a venue for an event. The next time the Developing Honor Society is planning a program, the policy or procedure can be followed as written without having to repeat the discussions. Having a policy and procedure manual can also ensure continuity so that certain tasks are being performed the same way each time. A policy and procedure manual is a resource for leaders to maintain consistent practices. It maintains history of standard operating procedures from one biennium and one group of board members to the next. It also includes a timeline for managing activities and responsibilities of leadership. A policy is a clear statement interpreting an honor society bylaw and how that bylaw will be upheld. It could also be a clear statement regarding the governance of the chapter. A procedure is the detailed description of the processes used to support the policy. Now that I have defined the basics, let's talk about how we get started. Throughout the development process, you will be provided with policy and procedure samples, and you may be asked to draft policies or procedures specific to what we are talking about during that module. If you find you need additional policies or procedures, you can add them as needed. During the first several years you operate as a developing honor society and chapter, you will likely find the need to add several more. It is first important to acknowledge that starting to write policies and procedures can seem overwhelming, and you shouldn't try to tackle them all at once. There are 5 steps to creating a policy or procedure. First, identify the need for the policy or procedure. Next, create a team who will draft the policy and procedure, and then seek approval from the board, and then further maintain the policy and procedure over time. When a board believes that the policy should be created, it must first determine if there is an actual need. Is the information already outlined in the bylaws? Or is it already clarified within a guideline? Is the potential policy in compliance with the legal requirements of the country, state, or province in which you are located? Is it in compliance with the International and Honor Society bylaws, as well as any SIGMA guidelines associated with that bylaw? How often does the board foresee this issue arising? Does a policy need to be created? Does a procedure need to be created? And what area or areas of operation will be affected? Next, the board should identify the appropriate team to write this policy or procedure. Who works in this specific operations area the most? Who will this policy affect? And who will have to live with the policy or procedure? By choosing a team made up of those individuals who have a better understanding of the area where the policy or procedure falls, and those who will be most affected by it, you can ensure that the best information available will be considered in the creating of the policy and procedure. For example, you would not want to assign the counselor to create a financial policy or procedure regarding how invoices and receipts are submitted to the treasurer. The treasurer has a much better knowledge of that area of operation. Once the need is identified and the team has been put together, the next step is to draft the policy or procedure. The group will want to review several factors, including the legal requirements, the bylaws and guidelines that are already created, any existing policy or procedure that may affect this new one, and any past board decisions that may affect the policy or procedure. Once these items have been considered, the team will discuss the purposes and goal of the policy and procedure and determine what is reasonable and appropriate to build the draft. There are several standard items to include when drafting a policy. They include the title, the issue being addressed, or a description of what the policy will cover, the policy itself, the frequency of when the policy will be reviewed and who is responsible for that review, and the date the policy was approved and who approved the policy. Additional items to include would be the date any revisions were made and who approved those revisions. You may hear procedures referred to as SOPs, or Standard Operating Procedures. Creating written procedures for the Developing Honor Society can be similar to drafting SOPs, or Standard Operating Procedures, for a business, hospital, educational unit, or department. The main components are the title, the description, the procedure itself, which should be written in a step-by-step fashion, including all pertinent information and details, should also include responsible parties for each step and the timeline or deadline for either the entire procedure or for each step as needed. Provide information about when and by whom the procedure should be reviewed. And finally, the date the procedure was approved, who approved it, and include revision dates as needed. Once the draft policy or procedure has been created, the team will present it to the chapter's board of directors for approval. This is an important step, especially for policies created, because these are items the chapter board of directors or honor society board of directors are agreeing to uphold, and it is a chance for another set of eyes to review the policy created and ensure that there is consistency and that all items were considered before draft. Finally, maintenance is a part of any process. Once a policy or procedure has been created, there are several questions you will want to consider to ensure it is maintained. Who is the lead officer or committee in charge of the policy and procedure? Who reviews this policy or procedure and how often? And how is this policy or procedure passed to the next developing honor society or future chapter leader? It is important to work out any details regarding maintenance to ensure continuity. In addition to the policy and procedure manual that you will work on creating, it is also beneficial to discuss creating a board manual. This can help orient new leaders and be used as reference throughout an officer's term. It can include the SIGMA, mission, vision, and values, the history of the developing honor society and future chapter. This can help future chapter leaders know how it all got started. They may also wish to use this for future chapter anniversaries. An organizational chart of the developing honor society and a board and committee directory are also helpful. You should include the completed bylaws template from each biennium. Keeping a historical record of bylaws from past biennia will help future leaders determine what the bylaws were at the time that a certain decision was made or when something occurred. The board manual is also where you can include the goals and strategic plan, as well as a copy of the most current written budget. It's recommended that each board member has access to the board manual, whether it be a printed copy or a shared computer or web-based drive that all board members have access to. The options for policies and procedures are almost endless. You should not get overwhelmed by thinking that you have to write all of them now. The policy and procedure manual will be a living document. You should be adding new policies and procedures when the need arises, and discontinuing and archiving those that are no longer needed, while revising and maintaining existing ones. As we discuss the following slides, I will give you some suggested policies and procedures in several different categories of operations. The ones that you feel you have an immediate need for, take note and share those at your next board meeting. To help you get started, we have listed some suggested content. An annual calendar of the Honor Society's events, a list of officer positions and their descriptions, an election timeline and procedure, procedures for meetings, including attendance, communication, the agenda, and minutes, and a policy on how your Honor Society will implement the SIGMA membership eligibility criteria. Policy and procedure for induction planning, and communication plans. These are some ideas for general policies and procedures. You will also find that you'll have multiple policies and procedures in specific areas of operations, such as finances. You could find that you may need a policy or procedure for expense reimbursement, required event funding, such as sending delegates to the Sigma Biennial Convention once you become a chapter, creating a budget and keeping it up to date, the financial reports given to the board and the general membership, who will be signatories on the bank account, and how and when will those be changed, and how financial decisions are made about investments, and who will maintain those investments. These are just a few examples of the financial policies or procedures that you may consider at some time during developing a honor society or as a future chapter. Some of these are more pertinent to how you are operating now as a developing honor society, while some may not be relevant until you are a chapter. In the operations area, you may decide to develop policies or procedures for event planning, strategic planning, board operations, elections, leadership succession, or inducting candidates. You can also create policies and procedures for your committees, including their description, additional duties or charges given to the standing committees that are already listed in the bylaws, position requirements for optional committees, position timeline or terms for optional committees, and the expected outcomes of the committees. Because the bylaws are written in more general terms, there will be areas of the bylaws or official guidelines that will need a policy or procedure written to provide more clarification and detail. This could include how you implement SIGBA's membership eligibility guidelines, how you will change dues when allowed, and other requirements to uphold achieving the organization's mission and values. You may choose to create a policy and procedure for various aspects of the Developing Honor Society's communications, such as methods and instructions for use. This could include listing of the various social media accounts, including the login and password information, and a list of those account administrators. You could also include the communication plan, as well as procedure for updating the communication plan, and a calendar of the Developing Honor Society events. You may also want to include a disaster plan. This could be for specific events at various locations, in the event of a campus or citywide disaster, or other type of plans that you may need. For an event held on campus, you may be able to utilize the disaster plan that is already available. The need for a plan and type of plan will vary based on the types of potential disasters that may occur in your area. Writing policies and procedures regarding your recruitment process can help to ensure that the process is uniform over each recruitment campaign. Some areas that you may choose to write a policy or procedure could include promotion and publicity, identification of potential candidates, marketing to potential candidates, inviting those candidates, induction planning and induction ceremony, and the follow-up after induction. This may also fall under a policy and procedure of the Membership Ambassador Committee if you choose to utilize that committee. As you can see, there are a lot of policies and procedures which may fall under several different categories. There is no correct number of policies and procedures that each developing honor society or chapter should have. Each group is different, which is why it's up to you to develop your own policies and procedures that will work with the assistance of samples and templates from Sigma. In this development module, you will be asked to create a policy and procedure for how your officer terms will be staggered. According to the bylaws, the terms of office are staggered so that all officers, directors, and the Governance and Leadership Succession Committee members do not all end their terms at the same time. Because the members of the first board were appointed at approximately the same time, there will need to be some 2- and some 3-year terms so that after 2 years, not all of the leader and committee members end their terms at the same time. Some items to discuss as you consider this policy are how long will each officer serve? There may be leaders who will volunteer to serve for 3 years and others for just 2. When will you have your first election? It is not required to have an election before you submit an application to become a chapter. However, if it will take more than 2 years to meet the minimum criteria to submit the application, it may be necessary to hold an election during the time as a developing honor society. Based on the officer terms you set for the first board and committees, consider which officer and committee member positions will most likely be on the first election ballot. This policy and procedure can be revised later if circumstances change. However, this will help you set the initial terms and expectations for each officer and committee member. If you elect only a portion of the officers and committee members in the first election, which positions will then need to be elected in the subsequent election? In other words, what will the rotation be? One way you could set this up is which officer and committee positions are on the ballot in even-numbered years, and then which are on the ballot in odd-numbered years. If you identify additional policies and procedures that you would like to create now, you can also include those. At the end of this development module, you will meet with Sigma staff to discuss the policy and procedure for rotating officer terms, as well as other areas covered in this module. This ends our discussions on the fundamentals of creating a policy and procedure manual for your developing honor society. If you have any questions, please contact the Sigma Chapter Development staff or submit a meeting request form.